Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little trip, not to a sun-drenched beach or a cozy mountain cabin, but back in time. We're going to open a very old, dusty door and step right into 18th century Paris. Imagine, if you can, the year 1780. You're standing on a cobbled street, but it's not the charming cafe-lined lane you see in postcards today. Oh no, this is something else entirely. You squint through the perpetual haze, a thick soup of wood smoke, coal dust, and, well, pretty much everything else. Your nose, by the way, is already regretting this decision. The air here isn't just unpleasant, it's a full-on assault, a dizzying cocktail of smells that your modern senses are utterly unprepared for. Horse manure, human waste, unwashed bodies, rotting refuse, tanneries, slaughterhouses, fish markets, and the vague, metallic tang of unidentifiable effluent all mingled to create a signature scent that will cling to your clothes, hair, and very soul. You'll breathe it, taste it, and probably dream about it. It's the kind of smell that doesn't just make you wrinkle your nose. It makes you question every life choice that led you here. This isn't a quaint historical reenactment. This is your new reality, and frankly, you probably won't survive this for long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just arrived in the heart of Paris, right by the Seine, which, by the way, serves as the city's primary laundry facility, drinking water source, and open sewer. Don't even think about dipping a toe in. The city is a sprawling, chaotic metropolis, bursting at the seams with roughly 600,000 souls, all crammed into a space far too small for them. Imagine New York City, but without skyscrapers, plumbing, or garbage collection. You stumble over uneven cobblestones, your new, somewhat ill-fitting shoes already protesting. Horse-drawn carriages thunder past, splashing you with mud and whatever else has accumulated in the street's ruts. Pedestrians, a jostling, diverse mix of merchants, beggars, artisans, and the occasional wigged aristocrat push past you without apology. There are no sidewalks to speak of in most areas, so you're constantly dodging traffic and trying not to step in the abundant, shall we say, natural deposits. Your eyes try to make sense of the visual cacophony. Buildings lean precariously, their upper floors jutting out over the narrow streets, almost touching those across the way. This architectural style, known as corbelling, was a clever way to maximize living space in a crowded city. But it also plunged the lower streets into perpetual gloom, even on a sunny day. The windows are small, often grimy, and many are just open to the elements, letting in the constant din and, of course, the smells. Laundry hangs from every available line, flapping like colorful flags of desperation. The houses themselves are a mix of timber-framed structures and newer stone buildings, but all bear the marks of age, grime, and neglect. There's a distinct lack of uniform planning. Buildings are squeezed in wherever space allowed, creating a labyrinthine network of alleys, courtyards, and dead ends that only a local could navigate. Historians still argue whether the haphazard planning of Paris contributed to its revolutionary fervor, making it easier for citizens to barricade streets and disappear into the urban maze. As you walk, you notice the drainage, or rather, the lack thereof. Open gutters run down the middle of many streets, carrying away whatever liquids are poured into them from above, and things are poured into them from above. Frequently, it's not just water. Chamber pots are routinely emptied. From upper windows with a shouted warning, Gardez-l'eau, a French corruption of Gardez-l'eau, or watch out for the water. If you're lucky, you'll hear it in time. If not, well, consider it an unexpected shower. This practice, while crude, was a widespread method of waste disposal in cities across Europe, contributing significantly to the rampant disease. You quickly learn to keep an eye on upper-story windows and develop a nervous twitch every time you hear a shout. The sounds are just as overwhelming as the smells and sights. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the creak of cartwheels, the shouts of street vendors hawking everything from fresh bread to dubious elixirs. The incessant clang of church bells marking the hours, the distant braying of donkeys, the squawking of chickens, the occasional bellow from a passing cattle herd being driven to market, and the constant hum of human chatter, punctuated by arguments and laughter. It's a relentless, high-decibel symphony that never truly fades, even at night. Sleeping soundly here will be a skill you'll need to develop, or you'll simply crumble from exhaustion. You might even hear the occasional cry of a lantern from a mob, a chilling reminder of the raw, often brutal, justice of the streets. And, speaking of public spaces, forget about parks as you know them. The concept of green public spaces for leisure is largely a future innovation. The few existing gardens are mostly for the elite or attached to institutions, not for the general populace. Your public spaces are the streets, the markets, and the crowded churches. You're constantly jostled, constantly in motion, a tiny cog in a massive, churning machine. The sheer density of people, the lack of personal space, and the constant sensory overload combine to create an atmosphere that is both exhilarating and utterly exhausting. You're beginning to understand that surviving in 18th century Paris isn't just about avoiding disease or starvation. It's about navigating a relentless, overwhelming assault on all your senses every single moment of every single day. This isn't a quaint historical setting. This is a survival challenge. So, you've somehow navigated the sensory gauntlet of the Parisian streets without getting trampled or drenched in, well, you know. Now, it's time to find your new home. Forget sprawling apartments with multiple bedrooms and en-suite bathrooms. You're likely to find yourself in a single, cramped room, perhaps on the 3rd, 4th, or even 5th floor of one of those teetering buildings you saw earlier. There's no elevator, of course, so you'll be huffing and puffing your way up. Narrow, winding staircases that are dimly lit, if at all, and probably smell faintly of mildew and mouse droppings. Each step creaks, a testament to centuries of use and the dubious quality of construction. Your apartment is probably one room, maybe two if you're particularly lucky, and sharing it with family members or even unrelated lodgers is a common reality. Privacy. That's a luxury for the aristocracy, not for you. Imagine trying to find a quiet corner to read or simply exist when you're constantly within earshot and often within arm's reach of several other people. There's no escaping the sounds, the smells, or the sheer proximity of your fellow inhabitants. You'll become intimately familiar with their habits, their snores, and their morning routines, whether you want to or not. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of such enforced communal living on individual identity and social cohesion in pre-modern cities. Did it foster community or simply perpetual irritation? Probably both. The room itself is modest. The floor is likely bare wood, uneven and splintered, or possibly packed earth. which offers little insulation from the cold that seeps in from outside. The walls might be plastered, but don't expect them to be perfectly smooth or clean. They're probably discolored by smoke and damp. Light is a precious commodity. Your window, if you have one, is small and might be covered with a simple wooden shutter rather than glass, which means you're choosing between light and warmth. Privacy. During the day, it's often gloomy, even with the shutter open, thanks to those overhanging upper floors you noticed earlier. At night, your illumination comes from a single candle, or perhaps a cheap oil lamp, casting flickering shadows that dance on the grimy walls. Reading by candlelight, charming as it sounds in novels, is a quick way to strain your eyes and go to bed with a headache. Heating is another challenge. There's no central heating system, obviously. Your only source of warmth is a small fireplace, if you're fortunate enough to have one, or a brazier, a metal basin for burning charcoal. Fuel, whether wood or charcoal, is expensive, so you're constantly making difficult choices between staying warm and buying food. You'll bundle up indoors, even during the cooler months, with multiple layers of clothing, and you'll likely feel a persistent chill deep in your bones, waking up to frost. Inside your window, if it has glass, won't be an uncommon experience. A quirky tidbit: some Parisians would sleep huddled together with their domestic animals, like dogs or even pigs, for warmth on particularly cold nights, despite the obvious hygiene issues. And the bed. Don't picture a fluffy mattress and crisp sheets. Your sleeping arrangement is likely a straw mattress, maybe stuffed with wool if you're a bit better off. These mattresses are lumpy, prone to harboring all sorts of delightful critters, fleas, bedbugs, mice, pick your poison. And they retain odors with remarkable tenacity. You'll probably share it, whether with a spouse, children, or a fellow lodger. The sheets, if present, are coarse linen, washed infrequently, and often patched and repatched until they resemble a historical quilt. A pillow might be a simple sack filled with straw or feathers. Falling asleep won't be about comfort, but about finding a position that minimally strains your back and allows you to ignore the itchiness. You might even find yourself dreaming of a softer, cleaner surface, a modern memory foam mattress perhaps. Oh, the luxury. Sanitation within your room is non-existent by modern standards. There's no running water, no sink, and definitely no toilet. A chamber pot is your constant companion, discreetly tucked away in a corner during the day and emptied, as you've already learned, into the street or into a communal pit in the building's courtyard. The smell of accumulated waste, even if the pot is emptied regularly, will be a lingering presence. Washing yourself is a laborious affair, involving a basin of cold water brought up from a public fountain or, if you're lucky, from a communal well in the courtyard. Hot water is a luxury, requiring you to heat water over your precious fire. A full bath is a rare event, perhaps once a month or even less, often at a public bathhouse. Daily washing is limited to hands and face, that fresh, clean feeling. Prepare to miss it. A mainstream historical fact is that personal hygiene standards were vastly different. The focus was more on masking odors with perfumes rather than eliminating them with frequent washing, especially among the upper classes who could afford such luxuries. Your possessions are few. A small chest for your clothes, a rough wooden table, a couple of stools, perhaps a simple cupboard. Every item has a purpose, every space is utilized. There's no room for clutter, no frivolous purchases. What you own, you truly need. Life here strips away the unnecessary, leaving you with the stark realities of existence. You're constantly aware of the fragility of your few belongings, the difficulty of replacing them, and the ever-present threat of theft. This is a life of constant vigilance, even within the supposed sanctuary of your own four walls. You might think about your vast walk-in closet at home, filled with clothes you barely wear, and the thought might bring a wistful smile to your lips, or perhaps a shudder. And then there's the noise. Even inside your cramped room, you're not insulated from the sounds of the city. Footsteps on the stairs, arguments from neighboring rooms, the cries of street vendors filtering up from below, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer from down the street, and the pervasive background hum of human activity. True silence is a fantasy. It's a constant reminder that you are but one small part of a teeming, noisy, and often overwhelming city. Your dream of a peaceful night's sleep in this cramped, cold, and utterly basic abode feels, frankly, a bit naive now. You've had a less than restful night, plagued by the straw mattress, the persistent chill, and the symphony of Parisian street life. Now it's morning. There's no snooze button, no gentle alarm. Instead, the rising sun, if it can penetrate. The grime on your window, or, more likely, the increasing clamor from the street below, serves as your wake-up call. The first order of business, after dealing with that ever-present chamber pot, is to face the day's most immediate challenge, getting what you need. And that means stepping back out onto those very same streets you so reluctantly entered yesterday. Your shoes, already scuffed and grimy, feel even less adequate today. The cobblestones are slick with dew and a fresh layer of yesterday's, and indeed, last week's accumulated filth. You try to pick your way carefully, but it's a losing battle. The air is still thick with the signature Parisian perfume, perhaps even more potent after the night's cool air has settled it. You'll become accustomed to the constant awareness of your feet, scanning the ground for the next puddle of murky liquid or pile of refuse. It's an involuntary habit, born of necessity. Historians still argue about the exact composition of the street filth and its direct impact on disease transmission. But suffice to say, it was a biological hazard. As you step out of your building, you're immediately plunged back into the swirling chaos. Horse-drawn carts, laden with goods, rumble past, their drivers shouting warnings. Pedestrians jostle, their faces a mix of determination, weariness, and occasionally a flash of exasperation. There's a distinct pecking order, and you, as a new arrival, are probably near the bottom. You learn quickly to stay out of the way of the more aggressive porters and street vendors. It's a constant dance of avoidance, a low-level martial art of urban survival. Your first objective is likely food. Forget a quick trip to a supermarket. There are no supermarkets. You're headed to the market, the beating heart of Parisian commerce. As you approach, the noise level ratchets up another notch. The shouts of vendors, the haggling of customers, the squawking of chickens, the bleating of goats, and the general cacophony of hundreds of people all trying to buy and sell creates an overwhelming sonic landscape. The smells here are different, but no less intense. The earthy scent of fresh produce, the metallic tang of blood from the butcher's stalls, the pungent aroma of cheese, and the ever-present undertone of general decay. It's a vibrant, dirty, and utterly necessary hub. You're looking for bread, the staple of the Parisian diet. You join a queue, probably a disorganized mob, more than a line, at a baker's stall. The bread is hearty, often made from coarser grains. And it's good, but it's also your primary source of calories. You might also try to find some vegetables, perhaps a few onions or cabbages, depending on the season and what you can afford. Meat is a luxury for many, so you might consider buying some less desirable cuts or offal, which are cheaper. The concept of refrigeration is centuries away, so everything is fresh or not and must be consumed quickly. You eyeball the produce, looking for anything that isn't too bruised or insect-nibbled. A quirky tidbit: to avoid paying market taxes, some resourceful vendors would sell their goods just outside the official market boundaries, leading to spontaneous mini-markets springing up in odd corners of the city. Beyond food, there are other daily errands. You might need water. Many buildings don't have private wells, so you'd head to a public fountain. Perhaps the Fontaine des Innocents, which, ironically, was built over a former burial ground. You'll join a line of people, each carrying buckets or wooden casks, waiting for their turn to fill up. The water is cold and often tastes faintly of minerals, or something else less pleasant. This is your drinking water, your washing water, your cooking water. You become acutely aware of its weight as you carry it back to your cramped room, carefully rationing every drop. Then there's the issue of waste. While the chamber pot is emptied daily, general household refuse accumulates. There are no municipal garbage trucks. Instead, you might have a designated spot in a communal courtyard for your refuse. Or you might simply toss it into the street, contributing to the very problem you're trying to avoid stepping in. The accumulation of waste, both human and animal, was a constant battle for city authorities, and one they largely lost. This creates breeding grounds for rats, mice, and insects, which are simply an unavoidable part of daily life. You'll learn to live with them, or at least try to ignore them. Getting around the city, even for short distances, is exhausting. Public transportation is limited to expensive hackney coaches or river barges, neither of which are options for your daily errands. So you walk everywhere. Your feet will ache, your back will protest, and you'll constantly feel dusty, if not outright grimy. The sheer physical exertion required for simply existing in 18th century Paris is a stark contrast to your modern, sedentary life. You'll find yourself wishing for a comfortable pair of sneakers, maybe even a scooter, or dare to dream, a metro line. But alas, those are luxuries centuries in the future. Your daily grind is a constant reminder of the physical demands of life before modern convenience. Asterisk. You've successfully navigated the treacherous streets and secured your basic provisions. But the saga of food in 18th century Paris is far from over. Getting it is one thing. Preparing and consuming it is another entirely. You arrive back at your cramped dwelling, perhaps with a loaf of bread tucked under your arm and a few meager vegetables in a rough cloth bag. Now, the real challenge begins, turning these raw ingredients into something edible, and more importantly, something safe to eat. Your kitchen, if you can even call it that, is likely a corner of your single room, perhaps with a small, makeshift hearth or a portable brazier. There's no stove with multiple burners, no oven with temperature controls, no refrigerator humming away to keep your perishables fresh. Cooking is a slow, laborious process, often over an open flame, which means you're constantly battling smoke and the risk of fire. You're also acutely aware of your fuel consumption. Every piece of wood or lump of charcoal represents a precious, finite resource that costs money you probably don't have much of. You'll become an expert at rationing, making every spark count. Your cooking utensils are basic: a heavy iron pot or two, a wooden spoon, maybe a knife. Forget non-stick pans or specialized gadgets. Everything is done manually. Vegetables must be meticulously cleaned, not just from dirt, but from insects and whatever else might have hitched a ride from the market. You wash them in that precious, cold water you hauled up from the fountain, hoping it's clean enough. Meat, if you were lucky enough to procure some, needs careful trimming and cooking to ensure it's safe. Without refrigeration, meat spoils quickly, especially in the warmer months. You learn to recognize the subtle signs of spoilage, because eating bad food isn't just unpleasant, it can be deadly. A mainstream historical fact is that food poisoning was a common and serious health threat, often mistaken for other illnesses. Your diet, by modern standards, is incredibly monotonous and lacking in variety. Bread, as mentioned, is the foundation. You'll eat it with every meal, perhaps dipped in soup or stew. Vegetables like cabbage, onions, turnips, and carrots are common, but fresh fruit is a seasonal treat, expensive and quick to spoil. Meat, for most, is a luxury. If you're poor, you might rarely eat it, relying instead on grains, legumes, and perhaps a bit of salted fish. Proteins are often scarce. Malnutrition, while not always starvation, is a constant underlying threat, weakening your body and making you more susceptible to disease. This lack of dietary diversity leads to nutrient deficiencies that would make a modern nutritionist weep. You're also contending with the quality of the food itself. Adulteration is rampant. Flour might be mixed with chalk or plaster to make it. Go further. Wine could be watered down or colored with dubious additives. Milk might contain God knows what. There's no food safety agency, no strict regulations. You're relying on the integrity of individual vendors. And let's just say integrity isn't always a top priority when survival is on the line. Historians still argue about the precise extent of food fraud and its long-term health consequences for the urban poor. But it was undoubtedly widespread. A quirky tidbit is that some bakers were known to add sand or sawdust to their bread to increase its weight and thus their profits, leading to painful dental issues for consumers. Your teeth are probably already paying the price. Meals are simple, communal affairs. There's no dining room table. You eat wherever you can, perhaps sitting on a stool or the edge of your bed, sharing from a common pot. The food is often bland, seasoned with basic salt and perhaps a few herbs if you can afford them. Exotic spices are for the extremely wealthy. You eat quickly, savoring what little you have, because tomorrow's meal is never guaranteed. The constant underlying anxiety about where your next meal will come from, and if it will be enough, adds another layer of stress to your daily existence. Even drinking water is a gamble. As you know, it's sourced from public fountains or wells, which are often contaminated by the very waste that pervades the city. While wine or ale might be safer, alternatives due to the fermentation process, they're not always accessible or appropriate, especially during a workday. You become accustomed to the faint, metallic taste of the water, and perhaps a slight stomachache is just part of your daily routine. You develop a kind of grim resignation, trusting that your body will somehow adapt to the microbial lottery. You're playing every time you take a sip. The simple act of eating, something you take for granted in your modern life, becomes a complex, multifaceted challenge here. It's a battle against scarcity, spoilage, and potential contamination, fought with limited resources and primitive tools. Your palate adapts to the simple, repetitive flavors, and your stomach learns to tolerate a surprising amount. The thought of a fully stocked refrigerator, a microwave for quick meals, or even a simple restaurant meal, seems like an impossible, futuristic fantasy. You're not just eating to live, you're living to eat, and it's a constant, low-grade struggle. You find yourself appreciating every morsel, knowing that every calorie is hard-won. Asterisk. So, you've navigated the Parisian streets, found your tiny dwelling, and managed to rustle up some questionable sustenance. Now, let's talk about how you're dressed for this adventure. Forget your comfy jeans, your breathable fabrics, your easy-to-wash t-shirts. In 18th century Paris, your clothing is not just about personal expression. It's a declaration of your social status, a shield against the elements, and frankly, a bit of a torture device. Let's start with the basics. For a man of modest means, you'd likely be wearing a linen shirt, probably unbleached, and a bit coarse against your skin. Over that, a waistcoat, perhaps of wool or a sturdy blend, and then a coat reaching to your knees. Your breeches, worn with stockings, would be practical, made of wool or fustian, a heavy cotton and linen blend. Shoes are leather, often with buckles, and not designed for comfort or long-term wear on those uneven, filthy streets. For a woman, the layers are even more complex. You'd start with a shift, a simple linen undergarment, then perhaps stays or a corset, which, contrary to popular belief, weren't always about cinching to an impossible degree, but still restricted movement and breathing. Over that, a petticoat or two for volume and warmth, and then a gown, often made of durable wool, linen, or cotton, depending on your means. A cap or bonnet would cover your hair, a necessity for keeping it clean, or at least cleaner in the dusty, grimy city. The sheer weight and volume of these clothes are surprising. Layers are key, both for warmth in unheated dwellings and for modesty. You move less freely, your strides are shorter, and every action feels a little more cumbersome. Imagine trying to carry water buckets or navigate a crowded market in multiple layers of heavy fabric, often without modern elastic or stretch. A mainstream historical fact is that the materials and cut of clothing, from the fabric quality to the number of decorative buttons, were immediate indicators of a person's social standing, visible to everyone. You could tell a lot about someone just by looking at their sleeves. Now, about the cleanliness, or lack thereof. Washing clothes is an epic endeavor. There are no washing machines, no convenient laundromats. You'd wash your linen shifts and shirts by hand in cold water, perhaps at a public washhouse or in your own basin, using harsh lye soap. Drying involves hanging them wherever you can, often outside your window, contributing to the visual tapestry of the city. Outer garments like coats and gowns are rarely, if ever, washed. Instead, they are brushed to remove dust and dirt, air it out, and spot cleaned as best as possible. The concept of wearing a fresh outfit every day is unimaginable. You might have 2 or 3 sets of basic undergarments, and perhaps 1 or 2 outer outfits for daily wear, which you'd wear until they literally fell apart or were passed down to someone else. Historians still argue about the precise frequency of laundry, but it was certainly far less often than today. And then there's the hair. For men, wigs, especially powdered ones, are fashionable for the upper classes, but for you, it's probably your own hair, perhaps pulled back or tied. For women, hair is often styled in elaborate ways, but again, washing is infrequent. Both men and women would use pomades and powders, not just for style, but to absorb oil and mask odors. Lice were an ever-present nuisance, a common ailment that was simply part of life. You learn to live with a constant, low-level itch, A quirky tidbit to combat the pervasive problem of lice. People would sometimes use mercury-based concoctions, which, while effective at killing the pests, were also highly toxic to the wearer. Not exactly a modern beauty regimen. The cost of clothing is significant. Fabric is expensive, and tailoring, even for simple garments, adds to the price. You don't just go out and buy a new coat on a whim. It's a major investment, often lasting for years, patched and repaired countless times. You cherish your few garments, mending rips and tears meticulously, because replacing them is a serious financial burden. This leads to a very different relationship with your possessions. They are tools for survival, not disposable fashion statements. The fashion of the day, even for the lower classes, is not designed for comfort. The high collars, the tight sleeves, the layered skirts, they restrict movement and can be hot in summer. There's no breathable polyester or moisture-wicking fabrics. It's wool and linen, which, while natural, don't always offer the best climate control. And in winter, despite the layers, the chill still seeps in, making you bundle up even more, turning you into a walking, shuffling bundle of fabric. You might find yourself longing for the simplicity of a t-shirt and shorts, or the warmth of a modern winter coat. The feeling of being truly clean in fresh, soft clothes becomes a distant, luxurious memory. Instead, you're constantly aware of the weight of your garments, their slight stiffness, the faint, lingering odors, and the general sensation of being perpetually slightly damp or slightly dusty. Your clothing is a constant reminder of the physical constraints and the stark realities of your new life. It's not just what you wear, it's how you live, literally, asterisk. You're now adequately, if uncomfortably, dressed for the rigors of 18th century Parisian life. You've eaten your questionable bread and sipped your dubious water. But there's a constant, invisible threat lurking in every corner of this city. A foe far more insidious than the street filth or the demanding landlord's disease. Forget about antibiotics, vaccines, or even a basic understanding of germ theory. In this era, staying healthy isn't just a challenge. It's a daily, terrifying gamble. Let's start with the big ones: smallpox, typhus, cholera, dysentery, tuberculosis. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're ever-present specters. A cough from a passerby could be the first sign of a deadly lung infection. A stomach cramp might be just indigestion, or it could be the onset of a virulent dysentery that will quickly dehydrate you. You're living in a biological minefield, and your immune system, used to a world of sanitation and modern medicine, is woefully unprepared. A mainstream historical fact is that childhood mortality rates were astronomically high, with a significant percentage of children not surviving past the age of 5, due to common infectious diseases. Medical knowledge is, by modern standards, rudimentary at best, and often based on theories that would make you laugh if they weren't so tragic. Doctors, if you can even afford one, might subscribe to the theory of humors, believing that illness is caused by an imbalance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow, bile, and black bile. The treatments are often as bad, if not worse, than the illness itself. Bloodletting, using leeches or incisions to drain bad blood, is a common practice, believed to restore balance. Purging, through emetics or laxatives, is another popular method to rid the body of perceived toxins. Mercury, a highly poisonous substance, is sometimes used to treat conditions like syphilis. There's no understanding of sterile technique, so surgical procedures, when they happen, are often followed by fatal infections. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness of many 18th century medical practices. While some had empirical benefits, many were based on flawed theories. Quirky tidbit: some common remedies included powdered, mummified remains thought to have healing properties, or bizarre concoctions like viper broth for various ailments. You might also encounter a charlatan peddling miraculous elixirs and patent medicines, promising cures for everything from toothaches to consumption, often containing dangerous levels of alcohol, opium, or other unregulated substances. You learn quickly to be wary of these hucksters, but desperation can make even the most skeptical person consider a long shot. Access to medical care is severely limited. If you're poor, your options are grim. A trip to a hospital, like the Hôtel Dieu, one of the oldest hospitals in Paris, is often a last resort. These places are overcrowded, unsanitary, and riddled with cross-infection. Patients with various contagious diseases are often housed in the same beds, sometimes 2 or 3 to a single mattress. The stench of sickness, unwashed bodies, and medical waste is overwhelming. You might go in with one ailment and leave with several more, if you leave at all. For less severe conditions, you might consult an apothecary for herbal remedies, or simply rely on folk cures passed down through generations. Self-medication, based on limited knowledge and desperate hope, is common. Personal hygiene, as you've already discovered, is a massive challenge. The infrequent bathing, the reliance on chamber pots, the lack of sewage systems, and the pervasive street filth all contribute to an environment ripe for disease. Open wounds, even minor cuts, can easily become infected and lead to gangrene or sepsis. Dental hygiene is practically non-existent. Toothaches are common and excruciating, often leading to abscesses and serious infections. Losing teeth is an expected part of aging, or even young adulthood. Even something as simple as a common cold can escalate into pneumonia in a cold, damp, unheated room. Children are particularly vulnerable. Seeing a child wrapped in a shroud is a disturbingly common sight. You learn to steel yourself against the constant presence of death and illness, but it never truly stops being unsettling. Every cough, every ache, every moment of nausea sends a jolt of fear through you. You're constantly listening to your body, trying to decipher if that little cough is just a cough, or the start of something far more sinister. The concept of public health, as we understand it, is nascent. While there were some efforts to clean up the city and address sanitation issues, they were largely ineffective against the sheer scale of the problem. Public health measures, like quarantine or widespread vaccination campaigns, are still a long way off. You're on your own, relying on a combination of luck, a strong constitution, and perhaps a prayer or two. The pervasive threat of illness casts a long shadow over daily life. It means that your future is always uncertain, that plans are tentative, and that any moment of health feels like a blessing. You find yourself appreciating every day you wake up feeling relatively well, knowing that countless others in this very city aren't so lucky. The notion of a long, healthy life, filled with leisure and comfort, seems like a cruel joke in this disease-ridden reality. You're simply trying to survive the next outbreak, and the one after that. You've survived the physical discomforts and the omnipresent threat of disease. But now it's time to confront another chilling aspect of 18th century Parisian life, the justice system. Forget about due process, presumption of innocence, or private trials. Here justice is swift, often brutal, and overwhelmingly public. It's a spectacle, designed to instill fear and demonstrate the absolute power of the monarchy. Imagine you've been accused of a crime. Perhaps you stole a loaf of bread because you were starving, or you got into a brawl in a crowded tavern. Your fate would begin not with a sympathetic interrogation, but often with immediate arrest and incarceration in one of Paris's notorious prisons, such as the Grand Châtelet or the Bastille. These aren't modern correctional facilities. They are dark, damp, and overcrowded dungeons where conditions are appalling. You'd share cells with hardened criminals, the mentally ill, and those simply awaiting trial, all crammed together regardless of their alleged offense. The stench, the vermin, the cold, and the pervasive despair would be your constant companions. A mainstream historical fact is that the Bastille, while famous for holding political prisoners, actually housed a relatively small number of inmates compared to other Parisian prisons, often debtors and common criminals. Once in custody, the process would be opaque and terrifying. There's no right to a lawyer as you understand it. Confessions, often extracted through torture, are highly valued. Interrogations could involve instruments of torment, like the boot, which crushed your legs, or the rack, which stretched your limbs. The goal isn't just to find the truth, but to obtain a confession, which often seals your fate. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of torture in extracting reliable confessions versus simply coercing false ones. You might find yourself confessing to anything just to make the pain stop, regardless of your actual guilt. Your trial, if it even happens in a recognizable form, would be swift and devoid of most modern legal protections. Decisions could be made by a single judge or a small panel, often with little scrutiny or oversight. Witness testimony might be unreliable, and there's no effective way to challenge it. The legal code is complex, but its application is often arbitrary, influenced by social status, connections, and the whims of those in power. If you're poor, chances are you'll receive the harshest sentence. If you're wealthy or well-connected, you might be able to buy your way out of trouble, or at least receive a lesser punishment. And then comes the punishment. This is where 18th century justice truly distinguishes itself. Punishments are public and designed to serve as a deterrent, a chilling warning to anyone contemplating similar transgressions. For minor offenses, you might be put in the pillory, or the stocks, exposed to public ridicule and the pelting of rotten vegetables and excrement from the crowd. Your face might be branded with a hot iron, marking you forever as a criminal. Imagine the humiliation, the indelible shame etched onto your skin for all to see. For more serious crimes, the consequences are gruesome. Public executions are common, often drawing large crowds eager for the spectacle. Hanging is a frequent method, but more elaborate and cruel punishments exist. You might be broken on the wheel, where your limbs are systematically shattered, or drawn and quartered, a process so horrific it's difficult to even describe. Even for less severe felonies, you could be sentenced to hard labor in the galleys, rowing a ship until you die of exhaustion, or to transportation to a penal colony. Overseas, a quirky tidbit, the executioner, particularly in Paris, was a well-known, almost celebrity-like figure, often from a family that had held the role for generations, adding another layer of macabre fascination to public punishments. The most famous symbol of this brutal justice before the revolution was the guillotine, though it only became widespread after the period we are discussing. During your time, the preferred method for noblemen was often decapitation by sword or axe, a quicker, more honorable death than the commoner's hangman's noose. The public nature of these punishments meant that death was not just an end. It was a performance, a grim ballet orchestrated by the state to reinforce its authority. The system is not about rehabilitation or reform. It's about retribution and control. The constant threat of arrest, torture, and public punishment hangs over every citizen, especially those on the fringes of society. You learn to walk carefully, to avoid confrontations, and to never, ever cross the powerful. The streets, already a physical challenge, become a psychological one as well, filled with the spectre of the law. You're always aware that one wrong step, one unfortunate encounter, could lead to a fate far worse than mere discomfort or disease. This is a society where the rule of law is less about protecting individual rights and more about maintaining order through fear. You truly hate living here. So, you've navigated the stench, the cramped quarters, the dubious food, the endless ailments, and the terrifying justice system. You've earned a break, haven't you? But don't expect a trip to the movies, a concert hall, or a quiet evening with Netflix. In 18th century Paris, entertainment is a different beast entirely. Rough, often boisterous, and sometimes just as risky as everything else in your daily life. Your options for leisure are heavily dictated by your social standing and, more importantly, your budget. If you're wealthy, you might attend the opera or a play at one of the grand theaters, where the fashion is as much a spectacle as the performance on stage. You'd see classical tragedies or comedies, often with elaborate costumes and sets. But for the vast majority, these sophisticated diversions are completely out of reach. For you, a person of modest means, entertainment often centers around public spaces and simple pleasures. Taverns and inns are popular gathering spots, much like modern pubs. Here, you can find cheap wine or ale, often watered down but still potent enough to numb the daily grind. The atmosphere is loud, smoky, and convivial, filled with boisterous conversation, laughter, and the occasional argument that might escalate into a brawl. Gambling, usually with dice or cards, is common, and you might see fortunes won and lost on the turn of a card. Be careful, though. Cheating is rampant, and getting caught on the wrong side of a card sharp could lead to a swift, unpleasant lesson in street justice, far from the official courts. A mainstream historical fact is that Parisian taverns served as vital social hubs, where news was exchanged, deals were made, and political discussions, often whispered, took place. Street performers are another source of unpredictable amusement. You might encounter acrobats tumbling in a public square, jugglers tossing balls and knives with alarming precision, or musicians playing folk tunes on rudimentary instruments. There are storytellers, too, reciting popular ballads or spreading the latest gossip and rumors, often with a theatrical flair. Puppet shows, especially those featuring Punch and Judy-style characters, draw crowds, their crude humor providing a moment of levity. It's raw, unpolished talent, often relying on audience participation and the energy of the crowd. A quirky tidbit is that some street performers would include trained animals, like dogs dancing or bears performing tricks, which would draw even larger crowds, despite the dubious ethics of animal training at the time. Public spectacles are a major form of entertainment, albeit grim ones. You've already experienced the joy of public punishments and executions. These events, horrifying as they are to modern sensibilities, were considered prime entertainment, a combination of moral lesson and morbid fascination. Large crowds would gather, often turning the event into a carnival-like atmosphere with vendors selling food and drink. You'd hear jokes, jeers, and gasps, depending on the severity of the punishment and the popularity of the condemned. It's a stark reminder of the brutality woven into the fabric of daily life. Beyond the gallows, other forms of rough entertainment also exist. Animal fighting, such as bear baiting or cockfighting, while not as prevalent in Paris as in some other European cities, could still be found in illicit pits. These bloody contests would draw eager crowds who placed bets on the outcome. Fairs and festivals, especially during religious holidays, offer a temporary respite from the daily grind. These events feature stalls selling trinkets, food, and drinks, along with games of chance, crude rides, and more elaborate performances. They're chaotic, crowded, and vibrant, providing a rare opportunity for widespread merriment. Reading, as a form of entertainment, is limited by literacy rates and the cost of books. For most, printed materials are a luxury. However, pamphlets, broadsides, and almanacs, often filled with sensational stories, political commentary, or practical advice, are more accessible. You might gather around someone who can read aloud, listening intently to the latest news or a captivating tale. Coffee houses, emerging as social and intellectual centers, also offer newspapers and pamphlets for patrons, though access to these spaces is more for the burgeoning middle class. Historians still argue about the precise impact of growing literacy and the circulation of printed materials on the burgeoning revolutionary sentiments of the era. Did it truly awaken the masses, or just reinforce existing grievances? Simple social gatherings are also key. Neighbors visiting neighbors, families sharing meals, friends meeting for a walk carefully mind the filth. These informal interactions provide companionship, support, and a chance to exchange gossip and stories. Laughter, even in this harsh environment, remains a vital release. Your entertainment isn't curated or passive. It's active, participatory, and often requires you to be physically present and engaged. It's a far cry from streaming your favorite show on a quiet evening, but in its own way, it fulfills the universal human need for distraction and connection. You might even find yourself chuckling at a particularly bawdy puppet show, momentarily forgetting the grim realities awaiting you tomorrow. You've had your fill of rough entertainment, and now it's time to face another inescapable reality of 18th century Paris, the rigid social hierarchy. Forget any notions of equal opportunity or meritocracy. In this society, your birth determines almost everything about your life, your status, your rights, your opportunities, and even the clothes you wear and the food you eat. You are born into a specific estate, and breaking out of it is virtually impossible. The Ancien Regime, as this system was known, was structured into 3 distinct estates. At the very top, though numerically small, was the first estate, the clergy. From the powerful archbishops who owned vast lands to the humble parish priests, they held immense spiritual and often temporal power, collected tithes, a tax to the church, and were largely exempt from taxes. They wielded significant influence over education, welfare, and public morality. Their lives, of course, varied wildly within their own ranks, but their position at the apex of society was undeniable. Next came the second estate, the nobility. These were the aristocrats, born into privilege, owning vast estates, and enjoying a life of luxury and leisure, often at the royal court in Versailles. They held most of the important positions in government, the military, and the church. Like the clergy, they were largely exempt from direct taxes, yet they held ancient feudal rights over the land and its peasants, often collecting tolls and dues. Their lives revolved around elaborate rituals, hunting, social gatherings, and political intrigue. They wore the finest silks and velvets, dined on elaborate multi-course meals, and lived in grand chateaux. You'd see them occasionally sweeping through the streets in their ornate carriages, a stark contrast to your own dusty existence. A mainstream historical fact is that while the nobility comprised less than 2% of the population, they owned about 25 to 30% of the land and held disproportionate power. Then there was everyone else, the vast majority of the population, comprising over 95%, who belonged to the third estate. This is where you, as an ordinary Parisian, find yourself. But even within the third estate, there were significant distinctions. At the top of the third estate was the burgeoning bourgeoisie, wealthy merchants, bankers, lawyers, doctors, and prosperous master craftsmen. They might have accumulated considerable wealth, even owning property and hiring servants, but they lacked the inherited titles and tax exemptions of the nobility. They often felt resentful of the privileges of the first and second estates, despite their own relative comfort. Below them were the artisans, shopkeepers, and skilled laborers, the sans-culottes, literally without breeches, referring to their practical trousers instead of the knee breeches of the upper classes. This is likely your category. You work hard, perhaps as a baker, a carpenter, a seamstress, or a street vendor. You earn just enough to scrape by, constantly worried about rising prices, poor harvests, or a sudden illness. You pay taxes, contribute labor, and have virtually no voice in how the country is governed. Your life is a constant grind, and any small misfortune can plunge you into destitution. At the very bottom of the third estate were the peasants who formed the bulk of the French population outside Paris. The urban poor, the day laborers, and the beggars. These are the truly desperate, living hand-to-mouth, often starving and with no safety net whatsoever. They live in the most squalid conditions, prone to disease, and with little hope of improvement. You see them every day on the streets, their destitution a constant, chilling reminder of how easily you could fall further down the ladder. Social mobility is incredibly rare. You are born into your place, and that is generally where you remain. Marriage might offer a slight upward nudge if you marry someone with a bit more property or a better trade, but it's not a path to aristocracy. Education, which might offer a modern pathway to advancement, is largely inaccessible to you. More on that later. Your children will likely inherit your station, trapped in the same cycle of labor and struggle. Historians still argue whether the rigidity of this social structure was the primary catalyst for the French Revolution, or if it was merely one of many contributing factors alongside economic hardship and Enlightenment ideas. The system is maintained by tradition, law, and force. The idea of divine right of kings reinforces the hierarchy, suggesting that God himself ordained this order. You are taught to accept your place, to defer to your betters, and not to question the system. The pervasive deference to authority, the bowing and scraping, the elaborate titles and forms of address. These are not just customs, they are reinforcing mechanisms of power. A quirky tidbit. Members of the nobility often had specific forms of address and even designated seating in churches, further cementing their visible superiority over the common folk. Living in this system means constantly being aware of your place and the places of others. It means knowing who you can speak to and how, who you must defer to and who must defer. To you, it means accepting that your hard work will never elevate you to the heights enjoyed by those born into luxury, and that their idleness will never bring them down to your level. It's an oppressive, infuriating reality. A constant source of simmering resentment that, unbeknownst to you, is slowly but surely building towards an explosive future. But for now, you just live within its confines, feeling the weight of its injustice every single day. The rigid social structure you inhabit means your days aren't filled with leisurely pursuits or intellectual discussions, unless you happen to be one of the privileged few. For you and the vast majority of Parisians, life is defined by work. Hard, grueling, often unrewarding work, from sunup to sundown, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. This isn't just a job. It's your entire existence. A constant physical and mental strain just to put food on your meager table. Let's imagine your daily toil. Perhaps you're a craftsman, a tailor, a shoemaker, a carpenter. You'd likely be part of a guild, an ancient organization that regulated trades, setting standards, controlling prices, and limiting competition. While guilds offered some protection and a sense of community, they also dictated every aspect of your professional life, from apprenticeship to mastery. Your workshop would likely be attached to your home, meaning your cramped living space also serves as your laborious workplace. The hours are long, starting before dawn and continuing well into the evening, often by the dim light of candles or oil lamps, further straining your eyes. The work is physically demanding, repetitive, and often requires fine motor skills under poor conditions. You'd be hunched over a workbench for hours, your back aching, your fingers calloused. A mainstream historical fact is that apprenticeships in most trades could last for 7 years or more, during which time young people lived with and worked for their master, receiving little to no pay beyond board and lodging. If you're a common laborer, your work is even more physically brutal. Imagine being a porter, hauling heavy loads through those crowded, uneven streets you know so well. You'd carry sacks of grain, barrels of wine, or bales of cloth, often weighing more than you do, relying solely on your strength and endurance. Your muscles would constantly ache, your shoulders would be raw, and your lungs would be filled with the dust and grime of the city. There's no machinery to assist you, no ergonomic equipment, just pure brute force. You'd be paid by the day or by the load, meaning if you couldn't work due to illness or injury, you earned nothing, and your family starved. For women, work is equally demanding and often less visible. Many women are involved in domestic service, working as maids, cooks, or laundresses in the homes of the wealthy. This involves long hours, little pay, and often harsh treatment. Others might be street vendors, hawking small wares, fruits, or vegetables, spending all day on their feet, shouting over the din of the market. Some might be seamstresses, doing intricate needlework for meager wages, their eyes straining by poor light. Childcare, cooking, and household chores also fall disproportionately on women, even if they have paid employment outside the home. The concept of leisure time for women, particularly those in the lower classes, is practically non-existent. The pay for most of these jobs is barely enough to survive. Wages are low, prices are often high, and a bad harvest or a sudden economic downturn can mean destitution. You're constantly living on the edge, one misfortune away from begging on the streets. There are no benefits, no health insurance, no retirement fund, no unemployment. If you get sick, you lose your wages. If you become too old or infirm to work, you become a burden on your family, or you join the ranks of the truly desperate. Historians still argue about the precise living standards of the Parisian working class, but there's no debate that it was a precarious existence. The working environment is often dangerous. If you work in a craft that involves chemicals, like dyeing or tanning, you're exposed to noxious fumes and corrosive substances without any protective gear. If you work in a noisy environment, like a blacksmith's forge, your hearing slowly deteriorates. Accidents are common: a dropped load, a slip on the greasy cobblestones, a hand caught in machinery, even simple hand-operated machinery, and can result in debilitating injuries that end your ability to earn a living. A quirky tidbit: some dangerous trades, like hat making, which involved mercury, would cause specific debilitating illnesses, often leading to neurological damage, earning the unfortunate workers the moniker "Mad as a Hatter." There's little opportunity for advancement. You're unlikely to climb the social ladder through sheer hard work alone. You might become a master craftsman after years of apprenticeship, but that only grants you more autonomy within your trade, not a change in your fundamental social status. The system is designed to keep you in your place, to ensure a steady supply of cheap labor for the economy. The exhaustion is pervasive. You fall into bed at night, your body aching, your mind weary, only to wake up a few hours later and begin the cycle again. There's no weekend break to truly recharge, no annual leave to escape. Your life is an endless succession of workdays, broken only by religious holidays, which, while offering a pause, still require you to manage your limited resources. The thought of a modern 8-hour workday, a paid holiday, or even a comfortable office chair seems like a ludicrous fantasy. You're not just working for a living, you're living for work, and it's a constant, physically demanding struggle for mere survival. Having spent your days toiling away, you might occasionally want to reach out to someone beyond your immediate Parisian neighborhood, perhaps a distant relative, a friend who moved to another town, or even just to know what's happening in other parts of France or the world. But here in 18th century Paris, communication is a slow, laborious, and often uncertain affair. Forget instant messages, phone calls, or even daily newspapers delivered to your door. Your world is incredibly localized, bounded by the limits of foot travel and the erratic postal system. Let's start with news. How do you find out what's happening? There are 24-hour news channels or internet feeds. Your primary sources are word of mouth, gossip in the market, rumors overheard in the tavern, or official proclamations read aloud in public squares. This means news travels slowly, often distorted by repetition and personal bias. Important events from outside Paris might take days, or even weeks, to reach you, if they ever do. And when they do, the details are often vague or inaccurate. A quirky tidbit is that professional news criers or gazetteers would stand on street corners, loudly proclaiming the latest news and rumors, often embellishing for dramatic effect, making them a key, if unreliable, source of information. Newspapers exist, but they are expensive and primarily cater to the literate elite. You might find a single copy available for shared reading in a coffee house, or you might hear someone reading excerpts aloud. These newspapers are often heavily censored by the monarchy, meaning you're only getting the version of events that the authorities want you to hear. Critical or dissenting opinions are suppressed, making it difficult to form an accurate picture of political realities beyond the official narrative. Historians still argue about the true extent of censorship's effectiveness in controlling public opinion and whether it inadvertently fueled the spread of underground pamphlets and subversive ideas. If you want to send a letter, prepare for a process that requires significant time, effort, and expense. First, you need to be literate, which, as we'll discuss, is not a given for most people in your social stratum. If you can write, you then need paper, ink, and a quill, all of which are costly. There's no post office on every corner. You'd have to find a designated drop-off point or a letter carrier who would collect mail. The postal system is rudimentary and unreliable. Letters could take days, weeks, or even months to reach their destination, especially if traveling long distances. There's no tracking number, no guarantee of delivery. Your letter might get lost, stolen, or simply delayed indefinitely. And speaking of cost, sending a letter is not cheap. The recipient often had to pay for postage upon delivery, rather than the sender paying up front. This means that if your intended recipient is too poor to pay or simply not at home, your message might never be received. Imagine waiting weeks for a reply, only for it never to arrive, leaving you in agonizing suspense about the well-being of a loved one. The simple act of sending a birthday card or a casual update is a monumental undertaking reserved for urgent matters or major life events. Travel, for communication purposes, is equally challenging. A trip to a nearby town might take a full day by foot or horse-drawn cart, exposing you to the dangers of the road, highwaymen, bad weather, and rough terrain. Longer journeys are weeks-long expeditions, fraught with peril and expense, certainly. Not something you'd undertake for a casual visit. So, your connections to family and friends outside of Paris slowly wither over time, replaced by the immediate community around you. Your social circle is largely determined by physical proximity. The absence of instant communication fosters a different sense of time and presence. Your world shrinks. Your concerns become intensely local. You are acutely aware of your immediate surroundings, your neighborhood, your street. The concerns of other cities, or even other districts, feel distant and abstract. This insularity can be comforting in a way, allowing you to focus on the immediate challenges of survival, but it also isolates you. You don't feel the interconnectedness of the global village that modern communication allows. Even within your own household, communication can be limited by the sheer demands of daily life. Long working hours, shared living spaces, and the constant struggle for survival mean that deep, meaningful conversations might be rare. Snatched moments between tasks or during infrequent meals. There's less time for introspection, less time for lengthy discussions about complex ideas. Your conversations are often pragmatic, focused on the immediate needs of the family. The idea of sending an email, making a video call, or even just picking up a phone and dialing a number seems like pure science fiction. You are reliant on the whisper networks of the streets, the slow grind of the postal service, and the sheer effort of physical presence. The ease with which you connect with anyone, anywhere, in your modern life feels like an impossible dream. Here, communication isn't a right. It's a luxury, and often a frustrating gamble. You're truly living in a smaller world, and it can feel incredibly lonely, asterisk. You're navigating a world where communication is painstakingly slow, and that's largely due to another fundamental difference from your modern life: the state of education. Forget about universal public schooling, mandatory attendance, or even widespread literacy. In 18th century Paris, education is a luxury, primarily reserved for the wealthy and the privileged. For most people, like you, formal schooling is either non-existent or incredibly rudimentary. Let's start with the hard truth: illiteracy is rampant. The ability to read and write is a mark of social standing, a skill possessed by a minority of the population. especially in the lower classes. You might be able to recognize your own name or a few common words, but sustained reading for information or pleasure is likely beyond your grasp. This isn't because you're unintelligent. It's because access to education is simply not available. There are no free public schools for all children. If you want your child to learn, you have to pay for it, and that's a cost most families simply cannot afford. For the elite, education is comprehensive and rigorous. Boys from wealthy families would attend prestigious schools run by religious orders, focusing on classical languages, Latin and Greek, rhetoric, philosophy, and history. Girls from affluent families might receive an education at home from tutors or attend convents, learning subjects like music, needlework, French, and perhaps some basic arithmetic, all geared towards making them suitable wives and mothers. Their education is designed to perpetuate their social status and prepare them for roles in court, government, or the management of their estates. Historians still argue about the precise impact of Enlightenment ideas on the curriculum of these elite institutions, and whether they truly fostered critical thinking or merely reinforced existing social norms for the burgeoning middle class. There might be options for a more practical education. Sons of merchants or skilled artisans might attend small, private schools that teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, the essential 3 R's necessary for commerce and trade. They might also learn bookkeeping or other vocational skills relevant to their future professions. This education, while basic by modern standards, provides a crucial stepping stone for economic advancement within their own stratum. But for you, as a member of the urban working class, formal education is largely out of reach. Your children, from a very young age, are expected to contribute to the household economy. This might mean working alongside you in your trade, or being sent out to work as apprentices, domestic servants, or even beggars. Practical skills learned through direct experience and observation are far more valuable than academic knowledge. You learn your trade by doing, mimicking your elders, making mistakes, and slowly mastering the necessary techniques. This oral tradition of knowledge transfer is crucial for the survival of many crafts and skills. A quirky tidbit: while formal schools were rare for the poor, some charitable organizations or parish priests might offer rudimentary catechism classes, teaching basic literacy alongside religious instruction. These were often sporadic and focused more on moral instruction than comprehensive academic learning. But for some, it was the only chance to learn to read or write even a few words. The lack of widespread literacy has profound implications for society. It means that information, as we discussed, is controlled and disseminated by those in power. It also means that complex legal documents, political pamphlets, or philosophical treatises are largely inaccessible to the masses, fostering a greater reliance on oral communication and potentially a more literal interpretation of what is heard. This also means that many people have a very limited understanding of the world beyond their immediate surroundings, relying on superstition and traditional beliefs rather than scientific understanding. Imagine the frustration of not being able to read a simple sign, a legal notice, or a letter from a loved one. You are dependent on others to interpret the written word for you, placing you in a position of vulnerability and reliance. This limits your opportunities, your ability to understand complex issues, and your overall participation in the broader intellectual and political life of the city. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and individual thought, is swirling around the elite coffee houses and salons. but its direct impact on your daily intellectual life is minimal. The concept of lifelong learning, or even continuing education, is unheard of. Once you leave childhood, your education is primarily practical, focused on the skills needed for survival. Your mind might be sharp, your observations keen, but the tools for formal intellectual development are denied. To you, this intellectual isolation is just another layer of the difficult reality of your 18th century Parisian life. You might find yourself wishing for a library, a bookstore, or even just a free public lecture. Anything to stimulate a mind that is constantly focused on the immediate, tangible demands of existence. Having glimpsed the limitations of communication and education, let's now turn to the pervasive absence of something you utterly take for granted in your modern life: technology. In 18th century Paris, there are no electric lights, no internal combustion engines, no telecommunications, no advanced manufacturing. Every single task, from the most mundane to the most complex, is performed manually, relying on human muscle, animal power, and rudimentary tools. This era is defined by laborious simplicity, making daily life an exercise in physical exertion. And patience. Consider your home. There are no light switches. Illumination comes from natural light, or, after dark, from candles or oil lamps. Imagine stumbling through your cramped room in the gloom, trying to light a wick without burning your fingers. The soft, flickering light casts long shadows, making any intricate task challenging. There are no electric appliances, no coffee maker, no toaster, no refrigerator. Your food is cooked over an open fire, requiring constant tending and careful management of expensive fuel. Keeping food fresh is a daily battle, relying on salting, smoking, or pickling, or simply eating it before it spoils. A mainstream historical fact is that the average person's diet was heavily influenced by seasonality and the lack of preservation methods, leading to periods of scarcity. Outside your dwelling, the reliance on manual labor is even more apparent. Transportation is entirely animal or human-powered. Horse-drawn carriages and carts jostle for space on the cobbled streets, kicking up dust and making that signature Parisian aroma even more potent. If you need to travel any distance, you walk. Your legs are your primary mode of transport. The idea of a train, a car, or an airplane is utterly inconceivable. Goods are moved by porters, straining under heavy loads, or by carts pulled by horses, oxen, or even dogs. The rhythm of the city is dictated by the slow, plodding pace of these manual efforts. Manufacturing is artisanal. If you need a new pair of shoes, a piece of furniture, or a tool, it's crafted by hand by a skilled artisan. There are no factories mass-producing goods. Each item is unique, often bearing the slight imperfections of its handmade origin. This means that goods are expensive, reflecting the labor and skill involved in their creation. There's no easy replacement for broken items. Repair is the default, and you learn to value your possessions precisely because they are so difficult and costly to replace. Historians still argue about the precise moment and impetus for the shift, from artisanal production to early industrialization in urban centers. Agricultural technology is equally primitive. Farming is done with simple plows pulled by animals, hand sowing seeds, and manual harvesting. Crop yields are heavily dependent on weather and soil quality, leading to periodic famines when harvests fail. This fragility of the food supply directly impacts your life in the city, influencing prices and the availability of basic foodstuffs. The invention of complex agricultural machinery is still far in the future. Even the simplest tasks that you automate with a button press are incredibly laborious. Washing clothes, as you know, is a back-breaking chore involving hauling water, scrubbing fabrics by hand, and hanging them to dry. Heating water requires building a fire. Cleaning your home involves sweeping and scrubbing without the aid of vacuum cleaners or specialized cleaning products. Every aspect of daily maintenance is a physical undertaking. You don't just use things, you operate them, often with significant effort. A quirky tidbit: some wealthier homes might have had hand-cranked water pumps to bring water up from a courtyard well. But this was still a far cry from modern indoor plumbing, and certainly not available to the common Parisian. The absence of modern infrastructure is also striking. There's no widespread sewage system. Waste is disposed of in gutters or cesspools. No clean water delivered directly to your tap. You fetch it from a public fountain. No electricity grid, no gas lines. Every comfort is earned through manual labor or obtained at significant cost. The air quality, as you've painfully discovered, is awful, filled with smoke from wood fires and coal, and the pervasive stench of human and animal waste. There's no environmental regulation, no understanding of industrial pollution. You're living in a world powered by muscles, fire, and ingenuity, but not by complex machines. The conveniences that make your modern life so effortless simply do not exist. You constantly find yourself wishing for a quick solution, a simpler way. A push of a button to solve a problem that here requires hours of strenuous effort. The sheer amount of physical work required for basic survival is exhausting and unrelenting. You are a living testament to the human resilience that existed before the advent of the technological revolution. But frankly, you'd trade that resilience for a working refrigerator and a hot shower any day. You've now experienced the daily grind, the constant threat of disease, the harshness of the justice system, and the sheer physical effort required to exist in 18th century Paris. But underlying all of this, casting a long, oppressive shadow, is the political reality. You live under an absolute monarchy, a system that, while seemingly stable, is dangerously unstable. Your life is dictated by the whims of a distant king and the entrenched privileges of the elite, with little to no say for someone like you. At the very top is King Louis XVI, ruling from the opulent palace of Versailles, miles away from the grimy realities of Paris. He believes in the divine right of kings, meaning his authority comes directly from God, making him accountable to no one but the Almighty. His decisions are law, his word absolute. You, as a commoner, are a subject, not a citizen with rights. Your primary duty is obedience, loyalty, and the payment of taxes that sustain the lavish lifestyle of the court and the endless wars of the state. A mainstream historical fact is that Louis XVI inherited a kingdom deeply in debt, largely due to France's involvement in wars like the 7 Years' War and the American Revolutionary War. The government is centralized and often inefficient, plagued by corruption and a complex bureaucracy. Decisions are made without consulting the vast majority of the population. There's no elected parliament, no free press to scrutinize power, and no public forum for dissent. Public opinion, while it certainly exists, is largely ignored by those in power until it boils over into unrest. Attempts to voice grievances are often met with swift repression, imprisonment, or even execution. You learn quickly to keep your opinions to yourself, especially in public spaces, knowing that a careless word could attract unwanted attention. The economy is a mess. France is deeply in debt, taxes are heavy, and the burden falls disproportionately on the third estate, particularly the poor and working classes. The first and second estates, as you know, are largely exempt from the most significant taxes, leaving you to bear the brunt. Food prices, especially for bread, are volatile and often sky-high, further exacerbating the financial strain on your household. Harvest failures lead to widespread hunger, sparking riots and protests, which are often brutally suppressed by the king's troops. You feel the squeeze every single day, the constant worry about how to afford your next meal, knowing that the king and queen are dining on elaborate feasts at Versailles. Historians still argue about the precise role of Queen Marie Antoinette's perceived extravagance in fueling revolutionary sentiment, but her opulent lifestyle certainly became a symbol of aristocratic excess. The legal system, as you've already experienced, is a tool of royal power. Laws are enacted by decree, with little public consultation. Justice is dispensed in a way that reinforces social hierarchies, with the wealthy often escaping punishment for crimes that would send a commoner to the gallows. The police force, the Lieutenants General des Police, while ostensibly maintaining order, also acts as the king's eyes and ears, watching for dissent and enforcing royal authority. You're always aware of their presence, a low hum of unease in the background of your daily life. The political discourse, for those who engage in it, is largely conducted in private salons and coffee houses, places you likely don't frequent. Enlightenment ideas, concepts of liberty, equality, popular sovereignty, and individual rights are beginning to circulate among the educated elite. These ideas, revolutionary in their implications, challenge the very foundations of the absolute monarchy and the traditional social order. You might hear whispers of these ideas, distorted and simplified, as they trickle down to the working class through pamphlets or impassioned street orators. They sound appealing, these notions of freedom and fairness, but they also seem impossibly distant from your lived reality. The simmering discontent is palpable. There are frequent bread riots, local protests against taxes, and murmurs of discontent against the king and the privileged classes. While these are often isolated incidents, they are symptoms of a deep and growing dissatisfaction that is reaching a breaking point. You might witness these acts of defiance, feeling a mix of fear and a strange, quiet sense of solidarity with your fellow oppressed. A quirky tidbit is that handwritten nouvelles à la main news by hand or libels seditious pamphlets would circulate secretly, spreading uncensored news and often scathing critiques of the monarchy and court, long before the printing press could mass-produce them openly. You live in a time of tremendous political tension, though you might not fully grasp the monumental shift that is rapidly approaching. The seemingly stable edifice of the ancient regime is cracking, weakened by financial crisis, social injustice, and the irresistible force of new ideas. You feel the weight of this oppressive system every day, the unfairness of the taxes, the arbitrary nature of the law, the crushing burden of poverty. You might not use the words revolution or republic, but you know deep down that something has to give. The political landscape is a powder keg, and you're living right on top of it, oblivious to the fuse that's already been lit. After navigating the filth, the disease, the injustice, the endless toil, and the suffocating political climate of 18th century Paris, you are left with one final, crushing realization. Your dreams. Forget the grand aspirations of your modern life, the career goals, the travel plans, the personal achievements. Here, in this harsh reality, Your dreams are modest, fragile, and often unfulfilled. The overwhelming burden of simply surviving leaves little room for anything else. Your primary dream, day in and day out, is probably just enough food. Not a gourmet meal, not a lavish feast, but simply enough bread to stave off hunger. Enough stew to fill your belly for another day. You dream of a good harvest, stable prices, and not having to worry about your children going to bed hungry. This basic, primal need overshadows all other desires. A mainstream historical fact is that the price of bread was a constant source of anxiety and unrest for the working classes in Paris, directly correlating with periods of social upheaval. Beyond sustenance, you might dream of warmth. A winter where the chill doesn't seep into your bones, where you don't shiver through the night in your thin straw mattress. You dream of enough fuel to keep your tiny room from freezing, enough warmth to feel truly comfortable, are rare and precious. Luxury, you might yearn for clean water, not just enough to drink, but enough to truly wash yourself, to feel free from the grime and the constant itching. The simple comforts you take for granted: a hot shower, a heated home, a clean bed. The stuff of impossible fantasy here. You might dream of health. Not necessarily perfect health, but freedom from the constant threat of disease. A day without an aching tooth, a lingering cough, or the stomach cramps that hint at something worse. You dream of your children surviving beyond infancy, of seeing them grow into adulthood, a hope that is far from guaranteed. The desire for a body that doesn't constantly ache from labor or illness is a profound, almost spiritual yearning. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of living with such high rates of mortality, and whether it fostered a fatalistic outlook or simply an intense focus on the present moment. Your professional aspirations are severely limited. You don't dream of starting a tech company or becoming a neurosurgeon. Your dream might be to simply maintain your current trade, to avoid falling into deeper poverty, or perhaps to achieve the modest status of a master craftsman if you're an apprentice. For women, the dreams are often tied to finding a stable, kind husband, managing a household, and ensuring the survival of their children. The idea of choosing your own path, pursuing a passion, or achieving self-actualization is a concept that simply doesn't fit into the brutal framework of this society. Leisure, for you, is not a dream of exotic vacations or elaborate hobbies. It's the dream of a day free from work, a few hours spent in the tavern without worry, or a moment of quiet reflection that isn't interrupted by the incessant demands of survival. It's the dream of simple connection, a warm conversation with a friend, a moment of laughter with family, free from the shadow of despair. A quirky tidbit is that while most couldn't afford vacations, the occasional pilgrimage to a local shrine or a large public festival was one of the few opportunities for people to temporarily escape the monotony and hardship of their daily lives. The dream of justice, of fairness, is perhaps the most dangerous one. You see the inequalities every day, the tax exemptions of the rich, their lavish lifestyles, their impunity from the very laws that crush you. You might dream of a world where justice is blind, where merit matters more than birth, where everyone has a voice. These are the seeds of revolutionary ideas, but voicing them too loudly could lead to your ruin. So, these dreams often remain unspoken, simmering beneath the surface, a quiet, furious yearning for a better world. Your dreams are simpler, humbler, more immediate. They are about basic needs, about security, about the fundamental desire for a little less suffering. The vastness of your modern dreams, the scope of your ambitions, the sheer number of choices you have, All of it seems like a cruel, impossible luxury from this 18th century vantage point. You live a life where the biggest dream is often just to wake up tomorrow and face another day, knowing that you still have a chance to survive. As the candle flickers low in your cramped Parisian room, casting long dancing shadows on the rough walls, you can almost feel the chill seeping in from the ill-fitting window. The distant sounds of the city, a perpetual hum of horse hooves, distant shouts, and the faint, unsettling wail of a child seem to soften, blurring into the background. Your body aches from the day's labor, a deep, persistent throb in your muscles and joints. The straw mattress offers little comfort, but exhaustion tugs at you, pulling your eyelids down. Your mind, though, might still churn with the anxieties of tomorrow. Will there be enough bread? Will the children stay healthy? Will the landlord demand more? But as the last remnants of the day's light fade, and the candle finally gutters out, plunging the room into inky blackness, a profound weariness settles over you. The smells of the city, ever present, somehow grow less offensive in the quiet darkness, becoming part of the air you breathe. Let the heavy, coarse blanket pull you into its folds. Let the sounds outside recede into the backdrop of your fading consciousness. You are safe, for now, within the walls of your humble dwelling. Close your eyes. The struggles of 18th century Paris will wait for the dawn. For now, there is only the darkness, the silence, and the profound, peaceful surrender to sleep.